Hey friends! Today I'm going to be borrowing a great Rimworld challenge from both Ambiguous Amphibian and more recently Hazor. I'm going to be surviving 100 days underground with a solo colonist, completely encased in stone. We're going to be playing on Naked Brutality and using the Cassandra Classic setting, Drive to Survive of course, because honestly the start is already hard enough. In order to survive inside a mountain, I needed a pawn that was as tough and reliable as the stone itself. So everyone meet Void, an iron-willed dirt mole whose name kinda matches his current predicament. His skills and passions are well suited for an entombed existence, as well are his innate features such as dark vision and elite mining. And it's from here where our story begins. In the early hours of day 1, my drop pod crashed down in the center of what can only be described as an endless sea of stone. Seeing no other options and not wanting to dwell on how bleak my situation was, I put myself to work carving paths in the surrounding rock. Two primal needs dominated my mind at that first day: food and shelter. Water would have been a third, but luckily we don't get thirsty out here on the rim. Shelter would be easy, there was plenty of rock that could be mined out into rooms and corridors. Food, on the other hand, would be much harder to come by. For that, I would need to plant nutrifungus, the only food capable of growing underground. In just the early hours of my mining, I came upon a small cavern to the north, where I found the survival meals that I had brought with me in my drop pod. There were only 10 of them, so I would need to ration them carefully. If I'm going to survive long term, I'll also need to set some goals. The first goal is creating a sustainable food source. In all likelihood, that would just be the nutrifungus. The second goal is finding a way to generate electricity underneath a mountain. And finally, the last goal is to survive at least 100 days here underground. Anything beyond that is considered extra. With my goals in mind and some mining having been completed, I laid on the relatively soft fungal gravel and drifted off to sleep, concluding my first day. On the second day, I dug out more of the encompassing stone. The hollows left in the wake of my pickaxe began to resemble the shape of rooms and corridors, and I roofed off the patches of disgusting sunlight that peeked through the openings in the cavern's ceiling. For now, almost every open floor space will be converted into fungal gravel, which can in turn be used as a growing spot for the life-giving nutrifungus. I don't recall exactly when, but at some point, Void placed a chunk of granite symbolically in the same spot where we landed. Perhaps this was a way to remember where we started, or maybe where we're going. Some sort of a keystone, if you will. This is all speculation, of course, for only Void really knows the true meaning behind it, but either way, I like the aesthetic of it, so it'll stay there for now. On day 4, we discovered compacted steel, and a lot of it. Steel was a much needed addition to our skimp resource pile. Now, we can make many useful items and furniture, the first of which being a stonecutter's table. With this table, I can turn all these unsightly granite chunks into useful stone blocks for construction. The following day, I made a steel bed. It was of poor quality, unfortunately, but that's better than fungal gravel, at least I think it is. More importantly, I made a horseshoe pin, which provides Void with a much needed source of entertainment, preventing his thoughts from slipping too much towards despair. A few days later, it was the 2nd of April-May, marking the end of Void's first week inside the mountain. It feels like I've barely gotten anything done when I look around. However, like most things, when you step back and look at the whole picture, your progress becomes easier to see and appreciate. I fill my time by cutting granite blocks and repurposing them into storage shelves and traps. I'm not anticipating any trouble during my time here, however, I want to be prepared all the same. Over the next few days, I evenly paced myself between the excitement of trap building and horseshoes to the calming repetition of mining and planting, all the while dancing gracefully along the fine line of starvation. It's almost become an art form, knowing just when to eat so I don't actually starve to death. On the 10th day, we enjoyed the taste of our last packaged meal. It would probably be the last for a long time. Luckily, just a day later, my first patch of nutrifungus was mature enough to eat. Sure, it wasn't a full harvest by any means, but the few bits of fungi would bring me enough nourishment to get me by another day. On the 13th day, I rejoiced. It was the first mature nutrifungus harvest. Gone were the days of eating under-ripened mushrooms. We'd only know the taste of hearty, full-grown fungi from this day forward. It seems that the mountain is grateful for my company, as it generously gifted me with another large vein of compacted steel. Perhaps the mountain is a living, breathing organism, some stoic titan of the ancient past, that yearns for friendship. Did it somehow attract my drop pod here, pulling me directly into the belly of the beast? Nah, what am I saying? That sounds crazy. It's just so easy to lose track of yourself when staring at these mono-colored walls all day, working with the same purplish blocks and same everything. Huh. Well, I'll just continue praying to the walls just in case the mountain is listening. A few days later, in a desperate attempt to obtain some wood, I tried to grow fiber corn, thinking that being near a sunny opening in the ceiling would help with the growth. But as it turns out, a growing spot needs to be in direct sunlight, so even being one adjacent square away would not be enough. Between the failed fiber corn experiment and having to continuously turn others away from being potential colonists, as there was no way for them to reach me, I realized that the artery-like corridors of the mountain were constricting me too much, and it was time for a change of scenery. So I set upon a new task, one of smoothing the rough cavern floors and laying granite tiles. Sure, the coloration wouldn't be too different from what was already there, but the smoothness and shininess of the floors would help bring a clean feeling, and the slightly different shades of purple and brown would be just enough color variation to keep me sane. The 20th day brought with it a sudden heat wave. For the past few weeks, the temperature had been steady thanks to being, inside of a mountain, but now all of that has changed, and like most problems in life, I chose to ignore it for now. As the day turned to night, the heat continued its relentless assault, and my mountain chamber did little to protect me. I attempted trapping the heat in separate rooms, assuming it might have been coming from the corridors that I had stretched out over the last few days, but that seemed to have no effect. What's worse, heat stroke was beginning to creep into my body, causing me to sweat profusely. I decided to improve my comfort and built a granite bed. It took some time, but unlike my previous one, this one reflected the drastic improvement in my construction capabilities. I relocated my excellent bed to the coolest chamber available, and prayed again to the mountain gods for the heat's stranglehold to relent. A day later, despite the repressive heat, I finished building a chess table to help expand my entertainment options. I always found the pursuit of min-maxing strategy and tactics to be exciting and worthwhile, and this wonderful game would help me keep my mind sharp when so much else around me is dull. In time, the Undergroundism Gods heard my pleas, and the heat wave dissipated. The days meandered by, and the ring of my hammer and chisel was slowly replaced by the shuffle of papers as I began researching biofuel refining at the new research table I had built for myself. But just when I had found a comfortable rhythm between tasks and downtime, my health took a sudden downturn. Sensory mechanites, small mechanical mites that can make their home in my nervous system, had entered my body. The pain wasn't so bad yet, and my decent skill in medical helped a bit, but I knew from the literature I had studied about such things there was no cure to this, so it's just something I was going to have to deal with for now. More days passed of mundane routine, and finally, after nearly 5 weeks in the cocoon of stone, I discovered components. Admittedly, I should have been strip mining way sooner than I am now, but time has a funny way of sneaking past you down here in the Underdark. After all, there's only so many tasks one can accomplish in a day. Energy, much like nutrifungus, is a dwindling resource that needs to be replenished constantly. On the 15th of August, the 5-week mark since my arrival, I completed construction on the biofuel refinery. This would be the first major step towards sustainable electricity. But there still remained one obstacle yet to overcome. The refinery needed power in order to operate. So I would need some form of electricity before I can create fuel for more electricity. This would prove problematic. Thankfully, when you're stuck in a hole inside of a mountain, there isn't much else to do other than work and think. Pondering on my dilemma, an alternate solution soon came to mind. The thing that I hated the most, I can turn into a resource. With this new epiphany, I began immediately researching how to harness the power of the dreaded demon in the sky, the sun. Things were going swimmingly for a few days, until on day 41, all production came to a sudden crash, as did my body. I had contracted food poisoning from eating too many raw mushrooms. That horrible pain in combination with the sensory mechanites had me cradling in a pile of my own vomit. Through sheer willpower, I methodically pulled myself back to my bed and waited for the internal storm of agony to subside. During the early hours of September 11th, quite a fitting date, I felt an unusual tremble in the ground. Could it have been an earthquake? Perhaps, though I had experienced such red flags before. For now, there was nothing I can do other than speculate. Forcing those dark thoughts to the back of my mind, I focused on completing my research on solar power. I even learned that without being fully exposed to the sun, a panel can still generate some electricity. So I got to work removing my makeshift ceiling and moving some of the furniture into my adjacent bedroom. Using my much improved construction skill, I carefully combined the necessary components and materials and completed the massive solar panel. Seriously, this thing is way bigger than I remembered it being. But then again, I guess everything is when you're cramped inside of tight rooms. It would only be exposed to a few squares of light that shafted down through the mountain's surface, but it was enough sunlight to generate some electricity. The following morning, I constructed the necessary conduits and connected them with the refinery. I also assembled a complementary battery to help store the excess power the solar panel might afford. By late afternoon, everything was put together, and I successfully turned Nutrifungus into Chemfuel. It was an incredible day, a day of great achievement, akin to the tales of the Philosopher's Stone transmuting base metals into gold. So too was my skill in turning wonderful Nutrifungus into fuel. Though tracking the passage of time down here in the rocky abyss seems fruitless, I believe that the simple routine of it all helps me maintain a stable mind. Luckily, this reminded me of the all-important date in Undergroundism, the Dim Festival. The 14th marked the beginning of it, and there would at least be a few days afterwards in which I could celebrate my people. The Dim Festival was a celebration of the Earth Gods themselves, a party in which you're allowed to dance and were encouraged to do so as lustfully and as carefree as possible. However, if the festival was substandard in any way, the gods would be displeased, and you would earn their disfavor. I would need to construct a light ball, a wondrous item capable of creating pulsating streams of light that made dancing seem even more exotic. However, the light ball wasn't enough on its own. It would need to be accompanied by at least one loudspeaker. After all, a dim festival is only as good as its sound system. My father once told me that when you're hosting a party, never go cheap on the drinks or the music, and that sage undergrounder advice has stuck with me ever since. With a renewed surge of ideological purpose, I carefully crafted each item over the next few days. By the morning of December 1st, the Dim Festival was ready to begin. With sweaty palms and anxious breath, I turned on the light ball and the loudspeaker and allowed the music to begin. At first, my movements were stiff and measured, but I closed my eyes and felt the bass of the loudspeaker booming through my body, sending waves of chills up and down my spine. Soon, it felt as if the gods themselves were flowing through me, and I lost myself to the rhythm of the music. Then I began to have a vision. It was one of myself, standing upon a grassy hill. Along the horizon were chains of snow-capped mountains. There were great mountain temples and kingdoms from eons past. There were trees with stone trunks so tall their canopies were obscured by the clouds, and beasts of all sorts inhabited the landscape. Flying lions with scorpion-like tails, dire bears, and giant ground-piercing armadillos, to name just a few. I don't know how long I was in my alternate state of mind, but I came to only when the music ended. A rush of joy overwhelmed me in that moment, and that is when I realized it was an unforgettable dim festival, one that I knew the gods gave me as a reward for my suffering and loyalty to them. And it was then that I knew I was destined to survive this ordeal. The following day, another test was put before me. The earth continued to tremble like it did a few weeks prior, this time more disturbingly. I knew for sure now there was a great swarm of insects amassing. The few traps that I had, though strong, would do little against whatever horde was building somewhere within the mountain. Luckily, I was able to get a sense as to what direction they were in, though that did little to comfort me. I would need to continue to pray and ask for answers and clarification, and perhaps try to fortify my defenses even more. The month of December went by like a blur. Each day is filled with the daily grind of research, farming, crafting, mining, eating, and, of course, sleeping. On the 64th day, I received a message from the Shattered Empire, a peoples that I did not know, but who seemed to know of me. They were asking permission to conduct a weather experiment in my area, a volcanic winter. I did not know if this would impact the bugs in any way, but I needed to try something. Seeing no downside to it, I accepted, and was sent a gift that I of course couldn't receive, somewhere out there in the void. Ha, see what I did? And thus began the volcanic winter. On day 70, my strip mining ventures went very well. I lucked into hitting some silver ore, followed immediately after by some uranium ore. However, my luck quickly changed. A sudden explosion erupted on one of my batteries, causing a fire to break out just a little bit. Thankfully, my precautions of building some solid granite walls between the different instruments proved to be valuable, as the fire did not spread very far, and I was quickly able to extinguish it. Despite the fire, I still continued to make great strides in my strip mining as I searched for more components. And even better, my mining skill was continuing to gain in leaps and bounds. The Undergroundism Gods were quite pleased with my gains in mining and filled me with a great inspiration for creativity. It was then that I knew I had been called for another purpose here, to construct a monument in their image, something for passerbys one day to pay homage to. After completing many of the necessary housekeeping tasks, I focused the last few days of my divine creativity boost on the dim image itself. Every ounce of sweat and drop of blood in my body, if necessary, would be poured into the construction of this great object. And thus, on the 12th of April, my magnum opus was complete. And there it was, the granite grand sculpture aptly named Void Sweat. This piece depicts black swooping arcs with black highlights bracketed between a meadow and a cliff. Void sits near an expanse, gazing at the sky. The work has a purest feeling and a well-balanced structure. Besides that, the scene takes place inside an encampment built near a stone. Maybe it's that Keystone that we had started with at the very beginning of our journey here. That would be quite fitting. This depiction refers to Void's town illuminated by the light of an aurora on the 12th of December, 5501. Well, how wonderful. The gods would be pleased with my work. After completing the dim image, I set it up in my room next to another, smaller image I had created, and continued to work, now under the constant gaze of the approving gods. At some point, the gods had answered my prayers, and the chittering and block breaking of the infestations and bugs had ceased altogether. Perhaps that, or maybe they had just moved on, or maybe the volcanic winter did have some sort of permanent effect on them. I can't be quite sure. Time continued to pass, day and night, night into day, and I continued to mine out the mountain. After spending nearly 100 days under the mountain, it has now become so clear as to why I was crash-landed in this mountainous terrain. It wasn't to simply have a dance party or to create electricity or even to grow nutrifungus, though all those things were certainly important and required for me to gain this clarity. No, my true purpose here was to become a legendary master in mining, so I can serve my gods even greater in the future, and I would not let them down. Like a farmer tilling the soil, I continued to carve my way through strip mining the mountain. Stone could barely stand a few swings of my pickaxe in front of me before it collapsed down into chunks beneath my feet. Nothing satisfied me more than the crunch of my pickaxe, breaking free bits of the mountain, creating veins for life to flow through. Well, maybe the only other thing near it was the satisfying crunch of nutrifungus in my mouth. And it was on the 12th of August when I hit my goal. Level 20 in mining, a truly historical feat. I had become a legendary master, someone world-renowned for their mining skills. It was foolish of me to think that I could truly understand the whims of the gods as I begun on this journey, that though this was the end of my 100 days under this mountain, it was truly only the beginning of the future that my pickaxe would bring me to. It took the better part of an afternoon for me to carve my way out from the depths of the mountain onto the very edges where I knew the outside awaited me. I had no idea what to expect as I continued to creep closer and closer, and doubt began to resurface in the back of my mind. It was odd, as I could feel the shift in the air and see bits of piercing light beginning to peek through the last crumbling parts of the mountain that lay in front of me. I couldn't help but stand there for several minutes staring. Was this really what I wanted? Once I broke through the surface, there truly was no going back. Was I ready? I allowed the doubt to creep over me and to envelop me for just a few heartbeats. And with one last steadying breath, I smashed my pickaxe down on the side of the mountain and caved in the final bits of stone that kept me locked inside for these 105 days. I pierced through, and a blinding light immediately assaulted me. At first, I couldn't be sure if it was some sort of alien weapon, but then I realized no. It was just the horrible sun. And so I pushed through and pushed out, and was immediately met with the skeletal remains of several insectoids that looked like they had been dead for many weeks. Somehow, some way, unknown to me, they had been dealt with. Perhaps it was divine intervention, perhaps it was something more entirely. I couldn't say. It seemed, based on my first observations, that they had tunneled in and made a home somewhere in some kind of ruin within the mountain along the edge. It was now up to me on what I decide to do next. I think I'll go down there and crack open a couple of those boxes and see what's inside. But that adventure will be for another day. But until then, I want to thank you all for being on this underground journey with me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care, everybody.